So then, yes, you're Donovan Jackson and you go from guard to tackle. Do you give up a Buckeye tree? Do you give up All-American status? Do you give up? He had to bet on himself and the team that Sunday before Penn State. And he did. And now look at what he got out of it.
In a championship season filled with adversity, good luck finding a position group that encountered more of it than the offensive line at Ohio State. Welcome back to 20 Forever, the stories of the Ohio State Buckeyes national championship team. We are joined for episode number 3 by national championship winning offensive line coach Justin Frye. That probably sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that hasn't gotten old yet.
Yeah,
I like that.
I don't know how many we're actually introducing you that way because you're also new Arizona Cardinals offensive line coach at the NFL level. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. So fun year, right? Pretty easy.
Yeah, everything in there. Whatever you can pack into, as I like to say, 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. We had a little bit there.
It's hard to even figure out where to start because we have talked about, obviously, the injuries, the illness to start training camp, bringing in, you can go all the way back to the transfer portal and Seth McLaughlin coming in. The things that you had to manage throughout the course of the year were just wild. So I don't even know what the first thing you think of is when you look back at the 13, 14-month journey.
I think it's kind of like a movie type deal. Tegra said that after he won the game. He said that. He's like, we're hugging and everything. And I'll never forget this, but he's like, Coach, it's like we're living a movie. I said, yeah. And you wrote the script, Bob. Like, this is awesome. So as you see that, and then you do look back and you touched on a lot of little things, but like you get to the end and the feeling you have of, as they talk with all those emotions, whatever's into it, all coming out right then, because then you do, it's like flashback of a movie where we look back and the rabbit hole of this section or this part. Yes, the sickness, the injuries, the Seth walking past you on a Tuesday practice of week 10, and you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You need tore your Achilles. Like just everything there. Hey, Carson, you were right early, then you're left. Now go put the ball back in your hand. Like all of those things come to a head there, and that's why it was just really cool, man. I mean, there's no coach talk, no speak other than like at that point, you're just like, my God, what we just did is really, really cool.
Films get made in a very short amount of time, but there's the work that goes into them. Writing the script starts way earlier. I don't think, and we won't spend a lot of time in this episode talking about Josh Simmons probably because the way that the season went, he obviously was pretty darn important in the beginning, but wasn't on the team playing as the season ended. But you got a little bit of flack from people for counting on Josh Simmons when you brought him in out of the transfer portal from San Diego State. Why did you know? What did you see out of Josh that made you think that he was a guy that you could build an offensive line around?
He was an uber talented guy. That was a good guy. Been around at different places or stops where like there's been really talented guys that were just assholes, bad people and bad guys. So like Urban used to say this all the time, like don't get seduced by the talent. Jimmy was not that way. And so knowing him from the way back of recruiting and going through and, the navigation of what you were really getting, like knowing you could get a really talented guy that would listen and would be coachable. And we worked through all that. It wasn't instantaneous, but you weren't getting a guy that at the end of the day was like just going to be their own entity and do what you were kind of there when they needed. It was the flip. Like he needed us and we needed him. And so that's why the relationship and everything built so well. And then ultimately got cut short.
Yeah.
But then once again, like we talked a bunch before, like you don't know till you know. And so an injury here to this guy and then an injury to this guy or not getting this guy and then getting this guy leading back to what all happened. Let me go back to Carson. He'll talk about Carson for years, but like a 12-game starter early in his career gets back onto the path of what the natural progression is. And then in the most critical time when you would bank on a young guy getting his first reps weren't his first reps. It was his 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th game as a starter.
Yeah.
What a blessing in disguise that none of us knew about.
Yeah.
And we got. And so that was You know, those little things like, shit, you don't know. You don't know till you know.
Yeah, Austin and Bill gave me a ton of flack last spring.
Is flack the word of the episode? Or?
Flack is the word of the episode. It's the word of the month. I got flacked by these guys because I went on a podcast and said that Josh Simmons was going to be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft a year from now.
Initially, you said after 1 year. That was the problem. That was the
Again,
flack
Austin
origin.
has the tendency to not hear what I'm saying in my head.
He did some stuff last fall camp when we moved him from right to left, where we all thought in that room, it's like, my God, we just lost Parasol, and now we're going to lose this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at what this guy can do.
Mm-hmm.
So not a shocking revelation.
But
from Burn, you know?
I mean,
Bill should be bit all over that, right? He's a line guy, right? Come on.
Bill was more skeptical than most about Josh Simmons. I think we have a tendency we don't watch every bit of film the way that you did or didn't have a previous relationship with him. It's like, well, he was penalized a lot. It's a big jump from San Diego State to Ohio State. And it's like, I think some dose of skepticism was fair. It didn't mean that we were like, well, there's no way this could ever work. We didn't really know.
Right.
And he had a ton of penalties at San Diego State. Yeah. But whatever. The point is, I knew I was able to make that proclamation because I had spoken to you about what you thought his ceiling was. Mm-hmm. And so I was just relaying information. It wasn't my own insight. I'm not an offensive line guru at all. But I did have your sense of like, this kid is something special. So when you go then to the lengths that you went to bring him in, take the flack from people about that decision, and then you hand over the starting left tackle position to this guy. He plays like the best left tackle in America for the first 6 weeks of this past season, and then he gets hurt. What goes through your mind? Is it, I feel terrible for him, or is it, what do we do now?
Both. I mean, initially with any of those guys, because the kids go down and you're like, damn, what's wrong with him? Mm-hmm. Like, you feel for the kid, you feel for, especially when you know it's a significant one like that, because it's the flip side of that. Like, we bring him in and put him in a situation where we need him. We got to use him, the things we have to do. He's coming in with the same mindset they are, whether it be Jimmy or whomever, you know, coming in like, no, I'm coming here to come to Ohio State to perform and play big and do this. And, you know, everybody's story is different. Like Seth coming in to right the ship, and Seth did not have a snapping problem, right? Jimmy had a penalty problem because he had them, but then you go the next 2 years, did he really? You know, so those things. So the initial feel for those kids is like, God, are you serious? Like, really? But then you have to move on. Yeah. And that's the unpersonal or the business part of our business is, you know, it is a business, but your product is still the people. So you're vested in those kids and those things, but you also have to produce, you know. So they're, even in that TV timeout, a long timeout, like, where we're going to go, who were we going to go with? This is long term now. So you got to make hard decisions in the heat of the battle. Talking with Ryan, talking with Chip on the headsets. We went with Zins and came out of the game all right. And then, you know, I should finagle through the next couple of weeks, and obviously that changed again. But, you know, or when you know it's that significant of an injury, you're like, God, like, everything this guy's trying to do, what he battled through, where he's put the position he's put himself in individually and for the team, and then this to be happening now, that sucks.
And I think even when we look back at the year and we talk about Seth's injury and Josh Simmons going down, that wasn't the final impetus of like, Donovan has to make this move. It was also Zen getting hurt. You had all these things sort of tied in a month stretch. And I guess it's similar to what Berm's asking, but in the heat of that battle, you're trying to find a solution. But there's got to be times you're like, how is this happening? Like, no matter what solution you come up with, then you're gonna have to do something else. Someone else is gonna get hurt. I'm snake bit. That's human nature.
The human element kicks in quick. That's then when you're around, whether it be the staff room, the right guys, like, that's where the head coach steps in. You know, and that was one thing that, like, with Ryan, we walked in after the Seth practice, and we were human for 2 or 3 minutes in the staff room. Like, you bring your food down, you're sitting in the staff room waiting to watch tape, and we're both looking at each other, and it's like, in your head, you go through as a coach, like, should I not had him in? It just was a freaky deal, you know? And so it's like, damn, now what?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you felt so bad once again for the kid, but then you figure out, like, could we have done something, this and that? And we both just looked at each other as friends, kind of like, man, that really just happened. It's
Yeah.
like, all right, but you know what? We got Carson. We have a guy. We've got guys inside, and we start. Austin's back and Tegra. So you have to find the solution to the problem, even though at some point, the human element kicks in where you're like, come on, man, again, another one.
Well, that really did start on the first day of training camp, and a few of your guys finally did say, "Oh yeah, well it was hand, foot, and mouth, and it was this going around." And it's like we all kind of knew that. We had never thought, how is this going to happen to a college football team? How did this occur? But you guys then had to adjust to that, not just the way you did practice, but meetings and spacing out. And it was like going through COVID again. When you found out that was day one of training camp or right before training camp, that was what you're going to have to deal with. I mean, what was your reaction to that? And how did you come up with a plan?
The initial reaction was like, I didn't realize that like adults and grown people get that. Like that was something with my kids, like, oh, they shut down daycare. Why little Tommy's got hand, foot, and mouth. We don't want to go around. Okay.
You almost laugh about it. You're like, oh, what a dirtball.
Right. Well, then all of a sudden, well, no, he's got it. Well, then the source showed up here. So now what do we do? So the things that you do learn from a medical standpoint with Mick and with Sean and those guys and the doctors coming through. And then, early on, I was like, do we need to get out of the room? Like, no, we got to control. And then we got to know. And I was like, nope, you know what? Been here, done that. So we met on the Jumbotron. We did the COVID type meetings. The most tiring ones there early on were, we had 2 or 3 guys out.
Mm-hmm.
They had to be secluded, but their stores were closed, so they could practice, but they were still contagious. So you go through a whole practice, and then all right, here's your 2 or 3 other guys that you got to individually practice. And so you put them through drills, and then you do that, and then you run in, and then you're watching tape and get ready for the next practice or walkthrough. That early on from the coaching standpoint, like that was exhausting because you didn't get to go in and sit in the cold tanks with your guys or just kind of take 7 minutes to, it was like, nope, get out on a sled, get out on this, here's conditioning, do this, stay away, here's your bottle, here's your, get their own towel. Yeah. Like things that once again, you don't know until you know when you're in it. Yeah, exactly. So that was early on more of the exhausting just from a coaching standpoint because there was no break. You were to keep those guys involved in the meetings. And then, you're on the Zoom, you're on this, you're on that, come out to practice after. There was a lot of work to that.
How did it put you in the position that you wound up, help you be in position for November?
A guy like Austin Sierraveld early, he played both sides. And he got tackle reps that week because you would literally show up the morning of practice. And it wasn't like, oh, he showed up with a fever. It's like, oh, he's got spots on his hands. Well, hell, he's plays center, so he can't snap the ball. So he's out.
Yeah.
So it really forced Austin. It forced our hands, with Luke. Luke was primarily just a right-sided guy, and then we got him to the left.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, like those unintended consequences in a positive way as it got later into the season, like, well, can he do it? Well, actually, yeah, go to practice 8 in fall camp. Sierraveld took 27 snaps at left tackle, so he's comfortable on the left side because he had to. Zenue going back and forth, George going back and forth a little bit. Frye, I think, played center at one point. So, you found some things that you just, to be able to practice and function, do that. And then I think for the kids too, it really did when those numbers were lower and we took a lot of reps. It kind of pushed some guys to some points where like they were exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
They were tired in camp, but they pushed them past the point where they had been. So coming out of it, sitting in the cold tank, it's kind of like, oh, I can do this.
You can do it, yeah.
But you were also going through that with Donovan having other injury issues that were keeping him off field. So you weren't just short a different guy every day. You're short, you're stalwart, you're your main guy. You're forced to put other people in other positions. And then someone like Carson who, the Carson Hinzman story will probably be overlooked by most people as this season is reviewed throughout history.
And it should be multiple major chapters in the book that's written.
And it started, again, that movie started a year ago prior to that. It started 2 weeks before the Missouri game where, people assume he was on a podcast and that's why he didn't play in the Missouri game. We were told or had heard prior to that he just was struggling a little bit towards the end of the year and you guys were looking for other options. And when you see all of those reasons that he could have hung his head or walked away or transferred home to Wisconsin or wherever. And then he goes into the summer, he's an Iron Buckeye. Then that happens in fall camp. Then he's not playing throughout the season because, you don't know where to put him. Like, hey, you bring in Seth, all the other things. Like, how do you know when a kid has it like that? Like the mental side? Because Carson, as someone who dealt with him in his recruitment, he's coming from a small town in Wisconsin. He was shy. He was almost reclusive at times. And then now you see this totally different person. How do you know that a guy is going to have it?
You never really know. You can try to look into their program, their background, their makeup, their upbringing, the things they've been exposed to, but there's no real because no one would ever miss. Oh, this is what it looks like. Go get this guy.
Have you've ever missed?
Yeah, I have.
That's episode 5.
Yes. Yes. There would be some things in the past that you're like, never saw that coming. Never would have guessed that. And it did in a miss. But yeah, that's episode 5, as Brum says. I think with Carson, his greatest attribute of anything that he's done and will continue to do, he really just doesn't stop. And some of it maybe is a little small town, just ignorance is bliss, of not knowing.
Yeah.
Because there were some meetings and times after practices where I'd be on him and he'd kind of come in and be like, Coach, what's up? What does this mean? Or why are we doing this? Or why are you on me about this? Just because he didn't know. But then once he knows, then he just continues to grow and go. So I think that it's a little bit of both, his makeup of getting up at 3:30 in the morning and going out and slopping the hogs and cutting trees off his grandma's house, all the stuff that he really did. Those are micro adversities or unintended consequences that he just didn't know. He just thinks that's a Tuesday walking through the snowdrifts in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, where he's from. That would then lead up to when things did get really hard, his genuine good makeup and good soul and spirit that he had, that when it did hit, then that's where those things that sometimes sound cliche, but the brotherhood, that dude loved the room and loved the guys in the room. He loves those guys. Yeah. So he legitimately, some kids would say, I want to do it for my brothers and stuff. That crossed his mind, right, wrong, or indifferent, and a lot of stuff that he was thinking about or doing. Mm-hmm. And so he got thrust in so early because Luke leaving early and some of those guys, to where he went through a bunch of shit that you really shouldn't ask a guy to do as a redshirt freshman. Yeah. And then that's what we said. Now all of a sudden you come into year 3 and he really starts finding himself and his strength and the Iron Buckeye in the summer, the comfort of not just being compliant, but taking charge and competing. And I mean, he was slapping Seth around in these competitions now. It wasn't even close on some of the stuff because he had built himself to that. And I think that just kind of came to a head football wise. And then he's got 2 years left to play really good football because now he knows the why. It's not just doing it because that's what we were told to do, or I'm not sure, so all I know how to do is go really hard. Now he's going to have a better understanding of that.
Ryan had said that the word, if he was to pick one word to define that team, it was resiliency. For your group, it seems like it was adaptability to me. You have a guy like Carson who played tackle in high school, then comes in, starts at guard, moves over to center, plays a whole season at center, gets supplanted by Seth, moves back to guard, forced them to go back to center in the middle of November. It was there, and this is also tying into Donnie as well, but is there a moment for those guys in that lead up after the Nebraska game? You're heading into Happy Valley with the season on the line, and your offensive line is shifting two dudes into new spots. Was there any reluctance from them or you to put them in that position because all the work had been done elsewhere?
I mean, that's a broad stroke reluctancy. There was
apprehension, conversation.
Yeah, are we really doing this?
Yeah.
Like you say, you're a guy like Donovan Jackson, been all Big Ten, all American here. You want me to go where? Yeah. For the team?
Against Abdul Carter?
Right. Against this guy? On a silent cadence? Oh man, I don't know, Coach. You sure? So yeah, there was the human point for all those guys, but then turning in the next leaf of over faster of, once again, back to the room and the accountability and all right, man, if that's what we got to do to go, then let's go do it. Not knowing like, oh yeah, we're going to show up and it's going to be perfect. There'll be some growing pains and warts there, but no, that Sunday conversation with Donovan after the Nebraska game, as we went 2-minute drill versus Jack and JT and doing those things. Yeah, it wasn't going to be perfect, but you tell them that, like, Donnie, the amount of reps you'll get between now and Thursday will be good. We'll protect you in protections and some of the things that we're asking you to do, but like, this is what we have to do now to go win. And we all want to win. And that he hung on that. Like you go back to Carson, a guy like Carson, like, okay, like, I've been here. Now you go, great. Let me go play really hard. And when you watch him after the sneak and after the 4-minute offense, like, just the emotion and stuff that came out. We all were. I mean, I was post game of that one, man. I'm hugging guys, run that damn ball, stick it up there. I mean, it was all there, because there was some uncertainty. But the fallback point again of like, for those kids in that room, and like, that's what I always wanted to be. I always want to be like, you get to go in the offensive line room. Like, you guys should be able to put cameras in there and like Hard Knocks and Real World and shit like that.
We tried last year.
It's just a different place in a good way.
Yeah.
And so like, to be in there with your guys as a coach to a player, and then being a guy that was an O-line up, like, your comfort zone is when you're around your own guys. And so I think those guys, I don't think I know, because ultimately it's what we did, like, even to a game after the Up North game, like the meeting post game that the team had that took, and then the meeting that we had in there, it was, we just talked like men, and the reasons for why, what happened, what it didn't happen, was total ownership, and then moved on. And
there's not an answer that anyone could ever give, I think, for what happened in the rivalry game. But when you talk about that ownership in the conversation, I mean, from your perspective, what was it like to be part of that? Because clearly you guys found a solution.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, if it's X's and O's things, if it's, personality, I don't know what the solution was. And even if you have an inkling of what it was, you don't even have to share it. But I just, like, being part of that process and getting it corrected the way that you did, it is hard to fathom, honestly, because and I'm sure it felt that way in the midst for you guys on November 30th. Like, what is happening? This is not who we are. And I wonder what, just from being in your shoes, especially under the pressure that you may have felt, or the flack that was happening out there.
Word of the day.
That's the word of the day for this episode. I just wonder what it was like to go through it from that low, which had to be the lowest possible, and then to keep doing the work to take it to the highest level 7 weeks later.
Yeah,
that's a big question. With no real answer.
Yeah,
I guess, but.
Man, yeah, it was a loaded question with a lot in there. No, you're in the middle of it, but the rival game and then the post game, almost like this is really happening right now.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, I just remember that. I just remember seeing Jack go by, and so like, I told my wife, the kids, like, get off the field and get out of here. Like, and I was just going after to make sure, trying to track, make sure our guys were as good as we could be, because you didn't know what was going on, right? And then you come back the next day and you watch the tape and you have your staff meetings and you're sitting there and you're everything in the program and everything the way Ryan's done is like, it's our job as coaches to give the plan and have the kids go out and be able to execute at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, then it starts with, what did I do and what did we do?
Mm-hmm.
That's as real gets. That's not coach talk. That's not bullshit. That's how it is. Like,
right.
That's your job. The number one job as a coach is to make sure that your guys go out and that your power to unit, they perform. Your kids are a reflection of you, how you prep them, how you taught them, what you got them ready to go so they can go perform. And so when you don't do that, those are hard meetings, rough meetings. And then you take ownership of that and the kids in the meeting, and the digging on that it was never like, well, what the hell did it, like, we've got to figure out what happened and fix this, because we're still going to have an opportunity to keep playing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we felt. And so those conversations and hearing what those kids said to each other and then what they said in the room to us, that was the first point there where I was like, okay, they took it the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they could have not.
Right. We need to get out and have a chance to go again. That was the Sunday night O-line meeting. Leaving that was like, okay, if this sticks and we have a chance to go do this, we're going to have a shot to play. And so they took that the right way. They took ownership of, the things that had problems, and I think they felt that we as a staff were that way too. It wasn't like,
well, because if you guys weren't realizing that there was an issue internally, that they're smart enough to figure out if you guys are feeding them lines.
Right, exactly. So that meeting there was like eye-opening to that point. And from the O-line, in my perspective, it's like, okay. And then you keep going, and the kids keep talking, and you still work through it. It wasn't instantly like, all right, turn the page. Like, no, there's some battle scars and some wounds there you got to clean off. And then once we found out who we were playing and what we were doing, then we started practicing back at it again. And that was the best part, to just get back and be able to go do ball, purposeful, meaningful ball again, and not just another practice.
Yeah.
You guys, obviously that game on November 30th, there were personnel matchups that were difficult, just in that specific game. To see then the individual players in your room, guys like Tegra, who had his ups and downs throughout this past year, but finished the year playing his best football. Austin gets hurt again in the playoff. Like, Luke has to come in and start his first game in the playoff at Ohio Stadium, the first game there, first playoff game there in history. How rewarding is it to see a guy like Tegra? Tegra, who I've said it on our shows many times, as talented a guy as there is, but you could always tell for him it was internal confidence issues. And do I belong here? Do I fit in? Am I really this guy? And then when you go out and you guys play Tennessee, you play Oregon, you play Texas back to back to back after the Michigan game, and your offensive line dominates those three very, very good offensive lines. Does it make you look back at November 30th and be like, what the hell, even more? Or do you say, this was just a bad day?
What a build-up to that.
Everything. Like, that was a shit day. Can I say shit on here?
Yeah.
Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Yes, that was a shit day. Because that game is so meaningful and means so much. I never won that game here. Like, I did, just like the kids, like, I wanted some gold pants.
Yeah.
Didn't get those. Not for lack of trying, it just didn't happen. But then I think you fast forward after the next month and a half and what happened. Like, if that worst of the worst had to happen to be a catalyst for that.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to do it every year. That way.
No. But like, you just can't, I don't know. You can't write the perfect script. It never happens exactly how you say.
Right.
So, back to how we started here before we started giving you so much flack, Burn, but like, when you win the game and the confetti's falling and you look at, like, we made the field goal and Donovan Jackson's walking across off the field. You just look at the two guys. I'm going to get emotional to think about this, but like, all the shit we just talked about, and he's walking off for the rest of his life. Like, all those kids now on my phone, it says after their name, like OSU, lineman, tackle, you have that. And now I went in and put champion.
National champion, yeah.
Because they did it. So then, yes, you're Donovan Jackson, and you go from guard to tackle. Do you give up a Buckeye tree? Do you give up All-American status? Do you give up? He had to bet on himself and the team that Sunday before Penn State. And he did. And now look at what he got out of it.
Right.
We didn't know that. You'd hope for that. You vest that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, that actually coming first. So like, we make the field goal and like, we did it. And he's walking off. That's one of my most memorable hugs I've ever had in my life with that kid. Because back to talking about Jimmy and the guys, like, what he really did to get there, I say this all the time, to make it a palpable or tangible thing, you can't quantify that in anything other than like wow.
Yeah.
You know? And so all of those things back to initially to the up north, like that day sucked. That was awful. But had some really bad shit in my life happen that learned really good lessons from, that's put me and my family and my wife in really good situations.
Yeah. I
think that categorizes as one of them. And that'll piss off a lot of the true Buckeye fans, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, like I said, like it did that.
Yeah, it's right there.
We did that.
It's right there on your sweatshirt. So,
folks, apologies again for the interruption, but at the podcast, we are working to create something special for you all to really enjoy. And as such, we're pretty selective about the brands that we work with and share with you all. And as a reminder for that, we're excited to reintroduce you to our newest sponsor, Axia Time. Axia is the official timepiece of both the College Football Playoff and the Heisman Trophy. They create ultra-custom watches to commemorate life's greatest moments, like winning a national championship. Axia has created an incredible collection of timepieces to celebrate the 9th national championship for the Buckeyes. These are truly heirloom quality, and there is even a limited edition Ryan Day autographed box set for those of you who want to own a piece of Buckeye history. And who doesn't? Equally important to the quality of the product is the quality of the people behind the brand. As you learn about their backstory, you'll understand why we are partnering with them to bring you this 24-ever series with the stories of the Ohio State Buckeyes national champions. Axia has created a special offer for the podcast listeners. Use the code THE10, THE10 at checkout and get 10% off your order. Check out their designs at axiatime.com, AXIA-time.com. Axia Time, watches that tell so much more than time.
You're not getting that back. I think I saved Donovan Jackson a little bit because I think we could have probably just talked about him for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We've got into it and we've touched on it several different ways, not just the move, but you go back to January of 2024 and it feels pretty likely, almost certain, that you're going to have to replace Donovan Jackson going to the NFL draft. And I think Jack Sawyer didn't name any names when he was writing in the Players Tribune, but I think we all anticipated it. We had conversations with you leading up to that deadline. We were, talking about trying to do some of that hard knock stuff with your group, and Donovan was going to be at the linchpin of that if he came back. I was like, well, maybe that ship has sailed. What were the conversations like with you and him before, leading up to, and then once you get some good news?
In those conversations, you always try, or I've always tried to be just factual, but the line there that's standard and I believe in is like, our job as coaches in college football is we're not there just to get you to the NFL. Our job is to prepare you to be ready to be an NFL player to the best of our abilities. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I told Donovan. Like, if you do come back, then here's the plan, and here's what we told his parents, like, here's the 2 to 3 things that those guys at the next level are saying are lacking or not there yet or whatever it is. Here's our plan. Here's how we'll work on them. Here's what we'll get them done. If you want to do that, that would then behoove you for the next move.
Sure.
And so that's what I kept it with Donnie. Like, selfishly, yes, I want you back. I want to coach you like that, but also, like, if you really want to go be ready and be at your best and be at the peak, then here's what we would do when you come back. If you do decide to leave, then be your biggest fan and help you out and do all that. But you just kind of tell them your opinion, what you think, and what you can help improve and get better. And I'm sure that happened with a lot of those guys from that, mm-hmm. in that kind of gray area of staying going. But then, yeah, it does help. You got like Jack and JT and all these guys. And they ultimately did. Like, the bulk of those guys came back because they wanted to do what we did. So, and then they knew that they could.
So when you go to bed one night and he's telling you he's leaving, and then you wake up the next day and he says, I've actually decided to stay.
So he never told me. Our conversation with Donovan was the flow. Like, I would talk to Donnie once every day or two. All right, what's new? What have you been talking about? What have you talked to your parents? What can I help you answer with? To the point where I was walking down the hall or whatever, we were talking, and he's like, oh, Coach, you didn't hear. I'm coming back. I walked into the
Your life has changed.
I walked into the office room. Like, wait, what? Say it again. He's like, no, I decided to talk to my told Coach Day, and I was going to hit you up after that, but I'm coming back. I was like, let's freaking go.
Why were you so low on the call sheet here?
I was going to let you know at some point.
They're just talking, Didn't care. Didn't give. I mean,
that's a pretty big deal for you.
There are certain parts of the negotiation you're not privy to and aren't part of in these conversations, and that's life in the new era of college football. The transfer portal, obviously, is another major part of that new era of college football. You guys ended your season last year against Missouri if we'll all call a spade, in one of the ugliest football games I've ever seen an Ohio State football team play in my life. I'm 46 years old. I've watched a lot of Ohio State football. I don't know that I've ever seen a game that bad from start to finish. Irrelevant. Erroneous. Irrelevant.
Not erroneous.
Well, truthful. 5 days later, Seth McLaughlin has on national TV in the Rose Bowl, 3 days later, a moment that people seem to put entirely on his back that you guys have, Ryan said it, you've said it, he didn't have snapping issues. There were other things that go into that are in the football side of things, which, are irrelevant to us for what we do. But you have to make a decision then, like 36 hours after that game happens for him against Michigan in the Rose Bowl, to say, get your butt up here to Columbus. We want to meet you. We think you're the guy to play center for us in the future. I asked the question earlier about how do you know when someone's the right guy? But in that situation, what were you thinking to be like, this has to be my center? Because no one else, there were Ohio State fans like, what in the world? Why would we take this guy? I hope he's coming in at guard. Why did you know? How could you tell, A, that it wasn't a snapping issue, but B, to get him, he entered the transfer portal on a Tuesday and was at Ohio State on Thursday. I know we live in a tampering world and I'm a tampering girl, but the point is, I know that you hadn't spent like a bunch of time investigating or getting to know Seth McLaughlin prior to that. So how did that come to fruition so quickly?
Well, when guys do go in, you just call and ask. You talk to the guys that coached him, guys who've been around his high school program. Tell me about the kid, tell me about the makeup, tell me about the background. And then you let this film speak for itself. So watching the tape, that was one thing with him when he got in. And I think it was comforting for him. I was like, Seth, you changed your grip on the ball 4 times during the year. What was the purpose of that? And then he's kind of like, oh, this guy's really watched tape. He's okay. Well, here's what we've done with guys in the past. If you like this grip, here's how we'll do it. If you like this grip, here's how we'll do it. I played center in college for the last 6-7 games. I was like, I actually like doing this. So if I had issues with this, I'd do this. So I think all of a sudden for him, it was kind of like, oh, this guy's not just going to get a body that's played at Alabama. He's got a plan. Big picture wise was just as we said, Austin, Tegra, Carson, Luke, Padilla, those interior young guys, really good players, really young guys. When are they going to pop? Just look at the timeline of this year with those guys going. Mm-hmm. With Luke popped when Luke popped. He had hit that magical, mythical number or whatever at the end of the year. We're because he played during the year and got some reps and done some things. He's like, oh, it's coming, man. When's it coming? And he even was that way. Damn, coach, I feel good about it. And then I do this. We're going to work through it. And then it hit. And obviously at the right time for him and for us. So putting in a veteran, older guy that had been in a program and been in championship games, been at high caliber was the thought there of if we can get him and add him to the inside. And then you got Donnie. And then you got Jimmy on the outside. You got Josh on the other side. You got Zenue as an older guy. George was coming around. Felt like just needed, if you could go get a seasoned veteran guy to kind of be the stopgap for the rest of those guys that come along. Was kind of big picture wise for the team.
Does it surprise you then when someone like Seth not only makes the move, but then so quickly becomes kind of the heartbeat of the offensive line? Or is that something that you pick up on in those first conversations? Because he was those are
things.
Guy,
yeah, those are things you're kind of banking. If you've played that much ball at a high level, it would just kind of be the flip. You wouldn't want to, but take a guy that had been a 2.5, 3 year starter out of this place, and then for whatever reason they decide to leave, and then you go to another. Like they know what they're getting. Like
I've actually seen examples of that in the last 2 years that have turned the exact opposite way. I'm not going to name names, but I mean, there are certainly guys who are here for a long time that go somewhere else and don't establish themselves as.
Yeah, but I mean, he played. Like he was the guy. I mean, started for 2.5. I mean, his first starting game was the SEC championship as a redshirt sophomore. So like he'd been in it. So there wasn't going to be like a movie or a show or a blitz or something where like, oh, this was new.
Never seen it. Yeah.
You know, I know just because building a relationship with him too, but like the breath of fresh air for him here coming. And once again, like this is going to sound like recruiting talk or coaches talk, but I'm just telling you, it's just not. It's what Ryan and what we've built and what he's built here with the kids and the locker room and the player. Like, no, they were perfect guys, but like write the script where the guy from Bama comes into another blue blood program and wants to take over the reins, and it goes as seamless as it did. That doesn't happen without the kids we have in the program in the room.
Yeah.
Well, it's just the Carson Seth intersection of this entire story, I just think is fascinating.
It's right. And that goes back to what we talked about Carson before, like maybe a little bit of ignorance, lack of ego, lack of whatever, but you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to go compete my ass off and be ready when my number's called. Well, your number's called on the biggest time of the year and you won a national championship. Good for him. Good for us.
Pretty great.
Right. And then a guy like back to Seth, like the same thing we said with Jimmy. Like I think we needed Seth and Seth needed us. And so that merge and marriage was really good because his vision, his lens of seeing a lot of ball, maybe able to say it to something, his, swag or sometimes lack thereof to like talk to Josh Frye and then be able to talk to Donnie and then be able to talk to Tegra because like he'd been in the locker room. It's a big melting pot of national level guys from all over the country as well. Mm-hmm. That was just a good little fit on top of he found another level of ball that he had hoped would always be there, but he wasn't sure. And we found it together. And so, I mean, being, sitting in Lincoln with him at the Remington banquet, like, you're sitting there and you're watching like all the shit and everything that this guy went through to get to this point that people don't know. You just got to sit and smile and be happy because it's like they did it.
Yeah. To put a pin in the Seth McLaughlin portion, we were in Chicago at the Northwestern game and I was walking off the field with him and I heard him tell his dad, like, my Achilles is tight. It feels tight. And this was 3 days
He didn't
later,
tell you that though.
So 3 days later.
Well,
so I asked him and it was the other Achilles that popped. So I was all worried about it.
But he didn't share it with you.
Well, you didn't share that with me.
No,
that's what I'm saying.
Not my place.
Berm's got this insight.
You catch a lot of flack.
See? This is the flack. That's why it's the word of the day.
It was the other Achilles that ended up going 3 days later.
No,
But he sticks around and is scooting all around the field for the next 2 months and I'm going to say this and it's going to sound stupid. Was he more important in those last 2 months than he was in the previous 2?
I think them seeing the role that he took on and what he did was another, oh man, this is how important it is. This is how meaningful. This is how important that play or this may be. So he slid into that role and scooted, and no pun intended, but scooted into that role just as he needed to be on his own accord.
Yep, didn't have to. I have this theory, and I've been on this platform, that I think Donovan Jackson was the actual MVP of the championship run.
I wouldn't fight you on that.
I was hoping that you might be biased and on my side, but I just don't know how, if you lost a Jeremiah Smith, it would suck for Ohio State, but you have Emeka, you have Carnell Tate, you have Brandon Ennis. Maybe it would be different with Will Howard, but Devin Brown was experienced. Pretty much everywhere you looked, there would have been at least some option to turn to. Given those 3 injuries, and then the way that Donovan played, if there had been one more and it had been Donovan, I don't know how you could have handled that. So,
Donnie or any, yes. I mean, the flexibility for Donnie to slide inside to outside and still to perform like we did was huge. But then now, you're legitimately talking like when we put George in at the end in the 4 minute of the Rose Bowl, that was our 10th guy in meaningful minute. Like we were getting out of the game. Right now, we didn't have to go score to win the game, but like George went in and played guard at the end of the Rose Bowl because Austin was down again, Tegra's shoulder was down again. Like, so there's some stuff that those guys fit through that we obviously had to keep out of the deal. So yes, as everyone made it through at the end for Donnie to go do what you did. Like, I wouldn't argue with you. Like, Donovan would be the MVP of being able to what we had to do. And being so far down the pecking order to him to have to be the linchpin of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, you get into that. And I mean, if Carson goes down, then you got Josh Padilla, who's practiced at center, been a center, but he's a tackle in high school. He's got to go in and he's going to be the guy to beat Texas or beat Notre Dame in the national championship. You know, we had the guard rotation going, but then Austin was out again and couldn't finish through again. So you're hanging on. It's like Tegra and Luke hanging in, because then who's next there? Then, like we said, well, George is a tackle, but George has got to go play guard. You know, Zenue tried to fight his way back, but like he was like,
yeah,
you know, yeah, it was. The hardest practice that I can vividly remember was our last Wednesday practice before we went to Atlanta for the national championship game, because you've got to go through situational football, third down, short yardage, and those things. And so a guy gets rolled up on, or a guy gets a shoulder, a guy, you know, you get these. We got really good look kids and these scout team guys. All of a sudden they going up and under, and a guy gets a shoulder. Like, every pressure, you're like, okay, good. We made it out 3rd and 7. Let's get to 3rd and 8. What's the blitz? Oh shit, it's internal blitz. Here we go. All right, Carson's good. Okay. We walked off the field that Wednesday. I was just like, all right, we're good.
Make it through the title game.
That's
the hardest one.
When did you know you were going to win a national championship?
When you looked at the clock at the Rose Bowl, there was like 7 minutes left, and we were just rolling.
34-0 with 8 minutes to go in the second quarter.
You look up, and at that point, it was like, we're going to run this thing. That's when I felt it.
For you, as a guy who coached in the Rose Bowl at UCLA, and like, how's that moment just as a full circle? And one thing I keep coming back to in this entire story is how many full circle moments there are for guys. I mean, it's throughout the roster, they're all over the place. But even for the coaches, there's things like that for you and Chip being back in the Rose Bowl in that moment. What was it like for you to look up and see that as the offensive line coach of Ohio State?
Like, there was some added juice to it. Like, let's go back to that. Like, Travion hit that big counter run back to the boundary down their sideline. Like, chest puffed out, feeling good, because then it was like, we're doing that to these guys. We can do that to anybody in the country. And we always knew we could, but it's like bearing fruit for the kids too. Like, all of a sudden you start doing it. And so at that moment there, I was like, we stay healthy. Don't turn about all the coaches' adages again, but they're all real. Like, we're going to win the whole damn thing.
I think you were letting Pat McAfee know, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I gave a little shout to that.
Nerd it out for us. Like, what did you guys do different football-wise, or was it just attitude and confidence? Because it looked like a totally different offensive line.
The executing at a high level with confidence breeds success. I say that all the time, and that's just the truth. And so,
most adages and cliches are adages and cliches because they're true
for a reason. Yeah, they all are real, and they just had a lot of confidence. Like, they were lining up, and at the end of it, like, that's offensive line play. And we've talked about this all the time, but like, when you line up, and I think at that point, like, people knew we were going to run some form of gap scheme, and you broke the huddle, you got the call, and then you could look up at the 3 technique, and whether it be actually do it or just by your demeanor, be like, hey pal, we're running the ball right here, and you're not doing anything about it. When you're doing that up front, then you're rolling. And that's how they were playing.
Yeah.
Knowing that we were going to pull, and he knew we were going to pull, we were going to have to splatter the guy, but we were going to splatter him one more time than he did. We were going to hip knock and get to the back or running over the top. You know, we were going to miss a couple of those, but then Quinshawn or Travion hit it back up inside. Like, the kids felt really good about what we were doing, and they were playing that way. And then, shocker, but we have really good players. So when really good players are playing with a lot of confidence, playing really well, then your output's pretty good.
I think that there's a tendency, as we tell these stories, when books are written, when Netflix releases a special on this team, usually it's going to be about the players, and it should be. The players are the ones that are front and center in most of these cases. But for individual coaches, I mean, it's not like you guys aren't going through the ups and downs and everything with it. You specifically, the end of that game on November 30th to the end of the game on January 20th, like, have you had a minute to sit down and consider how much your life actually changed in that 7 weeks for you? You're now the offensive line coach for the Arizona Cardinals. And if we're calling a spade, there was probably a moment in the previous 8 weeks where you didn't know if you were going to have a job. And so have you thought about how hoisting that championship trophy it changed your life? I mean, you've had more of an opportunity to relax and think about it than the guy still working at the Woody have. What is the perspective now?
It's still a little bit like, man, this was awesome. We did it. It's like Austin said at the beginning, like national championship, or like when I walked in the building in Arizona the first time. Oh man, hey, great job on the championship. Like that's rarefied air in itself. So that's just, I talk about Carson all the time for me in a small town, like 9,000 people in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, and like.
When was the last time you won a championship as a coach or a player? Like a
long time. I mean, never won in high school. Won a couple like AAU and travel stuff, summertime leagues and those things. But no, I mean, when we walked off the field in Atlanta 2 years ago after the Georgia loss, we were leaving the locker room and I sent my wife and my kids to the bus and I turned back down that tunnel that we went out this year and stopped and looked and took it all in, honestly, because I was like, I knew how hard it was to get there and I didn't know if I'd ever be back.
Yeah.
Honestly, as hard as it was to get to that point, So I wanted to take that in of appreciation, but also like, man, like all the time, the effort, and everything you put in and with the roster and the players that we had and the draft picks and that not to happen, like, how does it really happen? I kind of thought that a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just being honest, obviously.
If it doesn't happen now, how can it ever happen?
Right. It was one of those moments. And I wanted to just go take that in, like appreciating where we had been and what I had gotten to do. But then on the flip was like, damn, what else does it take? The ball bounced. What it takes is Jack Sawyer sacking the quarterback and the ball bouncing right back up to him and him taking off the other way.
Well, that's what Ryan told us. That's what he knew because the ball had, in his time as the head coach at Ohio State, the ball just never bounced that way.
Really? Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, back to originally where we started, like the Rose Bowl part of that game when Travion went down and then I started talking to that. I love Pat. I mean, he does. There's media and there's McAfee, right?
Yep.
I love watching this stuff.
Yeah.
I do. And AJ was over there. I think AJ was like hitting him like, look, I just, because he picked the Ducks or something. I was like, yeah, get out of here. So that was fun in the moment. But then the part of that, like, yeah, it was cool being back in the old office with Chip. But like I said, being a Midwest kid and a Big Ten kid growing up, like my dad was my head high school coach. We grew up every New Year's. He'd watch the Rose Parade. He'd get ready for the game. He'd watch the sunset over San Gabriel Mountains. So prior to that one, when the bomber went over and the national anthem's going off, my daughter, she got a great picture. My kids I talk to them all the time, but like, that was one there. I was like, this is really cool. Because of all the crap and the shit that the team and the kids and the couple weeks prior to be standing there in Pasadena, the new grass on the field and the turf, and then looking at the Terry Donahue, press box and stuff. It was like, this is really cool. And then a quarter and 4 minutes later,
yeah,
standing in the same place, like,
yeah,
we're going to run this thing.
Well, I think we'll leave it with this. You talked about leaving Atlanta those 2 years prior, and your wife and family were having a difficult time getting to you after that game, just like we were, because they don't do a great job of setting rules and boundaries down there. I know for certain that they were able to get on the field after that game. And so you talked about Donovan's hug. I imagine that hug that you got shortly after that, once the family got past all the ridiculous security in Atlanta, is probably one that you're not going to forget.
No. And with the confetti falling and you see him, because I'm looking around. I mean, I don't know what the hell happened, but we're looking around. I'm walking out, like I said, I see Donnie. I remember big old hug with Josh Frye. He's like, what did we just do? And you're grabbing his beard and like just the love and just everything. You have all these kids and you're hugging people, but then I'm starting to work towards the tunnel, like to find a family, right? So I walk over, like Urban sitting over Michelle, they're crying. I'm like, hey, he's like, great job. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, where's our family? Like, I just wanted my wife.
Urban and his wife are on the field.
They're on the field. I'm looking for Lauren and the kids. I'm like, where the hell's everybody at? So they finally come out, and it was just the hug of, because that's I give a speech to the kids every July, because that's our vacation time in college football. We know, and I know, my wife and I, we knew what we were getting into. We chose this way. My kids didn't. So the more time that I spend away from them with this, I understand that. But like when we get into July and it's vacation, don't take me away from my kids. Don't call because you didn't turn something in, or you got in some stupid trouble, or Mick, you missed a workout. Like, do not take me away from those 3.5, 4 weeks I get with my family. Because that's really why we do it, right? And so fast forward that to the end of the game, like hugging all those guys. But like, I just couldn't wait to hold my family, because like, you almost as a dad and a man want to be like, you want Wells, my youngest, to be like hugging me and be like, okay, I get it. This is why Dad's late at the office. This is why he's leaving my basketball game to go take a phone call or do this. Like, we get to live in a rarefied air in a place where like a lot of people don't get to do what we just did, you know? And so that to share that with him was really cool. And all the family, I mean, I remember seeing, you know, Karen and Brian and the kid and like, you know, Wells and Braden are like great buddies. They're holding up the thing, got their necklaces on and hugging like badass. And James is standing there, you know what I mean? And like the new sons are there with the earmuffs on and his cheeks are puffed out, like awesome. And Mike and Tori and Tim Hinton and all his kids. Like I told Uncle Tim after the game, like, you and I are getting a picture because we're never forgetting this moment. All the short yardage and goal line and all the stuff that we're going through, you know, and just down and down. And to turn around and see like Chip and Jill again, like, hey, who would have thought the band getting back together would do this, you know, like you'd hope, but you just didn't know. So, a lot of fun stuff that as we're sitting talking here in Berm's chair, like new stories and new things flashing back. That's really cool.
College football is different than it was when you started in the profession. You started young. One of your early compadres was Ryan Day. Like, what does it mean to be able to hold that trophy up with him together? And for me, the last thing I'm going to ask you is, there's a lot of reasons people maybe want to leave college football. What are you going to miss about college football and this specific team that just won your first championship since you were a baby?
For sure, the relationships. Because the unknown of where I'm going, like, it could be there, could not be there. I don't know yet. Feel like I'm around a bunch of really good people in a really good building and the organization I'm going to. But I think, like, looking back, like I said, like in that moment after Seth was hurt, I wasn't concerned sitting in that chair that the head football coach was going to be looking down the end of the table being like, how did you not protect your guy? We were in it together because we were just a couple of guys that had been through a lot of shit together. You know, reconfiguring our room with Brian and with Lock Dog sitting over there and some of his one-liners, and Mike and Binksy and Key and Billy coming in and Chip at the end, and even before me, you know, things at times we even had before with Tony and with Kata, with Kev, you know. Hopefully it's the same that way at the next level, but don't know that it will be, because it's also a pretty special place, you know. And that was one thing that I always said about Ryan. I think I told you guys the first time I got interviewed, but like, you sit in that chair, none of us have any idea what comes along with that chair. And to still see that that's our day, it's pretty cool. Now, not in everything, because it can't be. And that's what I said. There's some things where he sit that I know that he's got to go through that you don't know till you know.
That's right.
And we've not sat in that chair. So we all can have opinions and you can all have that. But when it's real-time decisions that he has to make, it's just not easy. Yeah. But as close as he still is to our day, the guy went and played, you know, we played, racquetball and shit at Boston College. You're playing pickup basketball and he's walking out with an ice bag on his calf because he about popped his Achilles, and we're playing lunchtimes hoops in Philly or something. You know what I mean? Like, does that exist everywhere? Probably not. I was fortunate enough to be around that with him, and those, like I said, with Brian. And I mean, Hart and I become really close because our kids and our families are close. You watch a guy like Key that's just grinded his ass off to get to where he's at, and where same two people on the outside. Well, he's never done this and that. You don't know. Shut up. You know what this guy's done or hasn't done. So all that stuff. Drev was with us, and Mike's at UNLV now. I mean, there were some.
It's only a 3.5 hour drive from Vegas.
Oh yeah, or like a 40-minute JSX flight. So you
might be able to just pop on a flight. I would drive.
I would drive. Okay. Well, you're going to stop at Walmart. And you're going to make a 2-hour drive, 4-hour drive. Anyway,
you got to head up Kingman Way and hop on over that.
Yeah. So,
oh boy, now we're really going down.
Yeah. So that I'll miss that the most is like walking in that room and closing the door, and I always start the meetings with that. Good afternoon, men, and the boys sitting right back. I haven't had that chance yet to do that just yet, but that'll be hard to replace because they're my guys and our guys in our room, and we did it.
Well, you said we don't know what it's like to sit in that chair. We really appreciate the stories and you sitting in that chair with us. This isn't our normal studio, and you didn't have to pop in here and give us that time. So we really, really appreciate it. We want to keep telling all these stories about what you all accomplished together, not just you, not just the offensive line, but all of the Buckeyes. So getting some of that behind the scenes stuff from you, we really appreciate your time and your stories, Justin. It's been 24 ever. I think we could have probably talked for a few more hours, but this man's got some other things to do.
You guys play at Cincinnati.
Oh, come on. See, I knew this was about that.
So,
you could do that off.
I'm sure you'll have some tickets to give away, but just
didn't have to do it
keep me in mind
in the outro. But he I guess he wanted it out there for public.
I want to make sure that I'm putting a little pressure on you. I might need some. I will wear Cardinals gear that day.
No, you won't.
No, you would catch a lot of flack from a lot of people.
Oh, it's a callback. But he's good at what he does. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. This is national championship winning offensive line coach Justin Frye. We appreciate him more than we could ever say for popping on with us for some 24 ever talking about the stories of the national championship Ohio State Buckeyes. More to come. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.